Thanks for joining me today. One of the, or shall I say, some of the thickest books on my library shelves are theology books. And this particular book, written by Millard Erickson, has like over 1,300 pages, but that wasn't enough. He had another 3 to complement it. And it tackles the topic of theology, which he takes 7 pages to give a definition and talks about it in 20 pages. But as we're doing big picture, basically what theology is a study of God. And in our study of God, we theologians, people who study God, that is, and particularly those people who make a career out of it or profession out of it, and in particularly interested in that, have come up with basically 2 categories that they draw from. One is what we call natural revelation, and there is, or universal, and the other area is what we call special or specific revelation. In natural revelation, an example of natural revelation that people can draw from at all times throughout the ages is nature, right? That when you look at the created world, you can learn something about it, about the Creator through observing creation. Specific or special revelation, we would look at where God has revealed himself to particular people at particular times. And sometimes that's through dreams, visions, miracles, prophecies, through the person of Jesus, of course. And of course, that's all, a lot of that is recorded in in our primary source of special revelation, that is the Bible, the scriptures. And in the book of Genesis, right, both of these types of revelations come together. We have the created world being created by the Creator, and so we look at it from the natural revelation that everybody can see, and it tells us some things about the Creator. Like I said, we can observe complexity and order and beauty, and how things have relationship and work together. There is this evidence, as some would say, of intelligent design. And then, of course, when we actually read about it, the creation story in Genesis, as we read that and know the story of the beginnings from the text of Genesis, we learn about God's intention for humankind. We learn about more certain characteristics of who God is. We learn and we read of how God specifically communicated and initiated relationship with Adam and Eve and with Noah and of course with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, that we've been talking about these things. And today we are starting in chapter 37, continuing to draw this big picture. And I want us to recognize too that how these messages are delivered will be influenced by the way, you might say, the material that we're looking at. And as I mentioned, Genesis has this narrative element to it, right? Especially 12 through 50, it's really this big story. And so to tell it probably most accurately, and at least in the big picture, is I tell you the story. As we get to different books, it'll be different in some ways, but this is in the story. And so the primary thing that I think we need to do to grab that picture is to know the story. And so that's what I bring to you. And in verse 1 of chapter 37 of Genesis, we read that Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. And this is the account of Jacob's family line, that Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brother, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. And so he says, we're sort of introduced now. We've talked a little bit about Jacob. We've talked about, right, recognize these 12 sons and a daughter. And now the story directly brings us and calls us to pay attention to Rachel's firstborn, but of course, way down in the family, one of the youngest, right? Benjamin younger than he. And it seems now we're saying, oh, the story is shifting to follow Joseph. And we're introduced where Joseph is out with his brothers tending the flocks, and he does, it seems he sort of does what irritated the older siblings throughout time, and that is he tells on them, right? It's probably, if you're an older sibling, you have probably growing up had a younger sibling tell on you to your parents. Well, this is what Joseph does. He brings a bad report to his father, which of course puts him in their bad books. And another thing is that he was his father's special son. He gets a special robe. If you went to Sunday school, he was described as a coat of many colors. And so he's the favorite, and they might have called him some equivalent of the snitch, or he's going to tell on you. And so he's in their bad books. And the brothers don't, in general, right, they don't manage that well. They let that get to them, and they resent, in their anger, it builds into resentment and bitterness. It's sort of like that thing that kids maybe say when they're upset, right? You love them more than me. And that was sort of in the background, I think, of the older sons in the back of their minds. And we read in verse 4 that they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. That the relationship he had with his brothers, it's tense, it's difficult. They don't like him. And he's, in some ways, I guess, by himself, pushed off in some ways. But it gets worse, right? It gets worse because he has this dream, and he has a couple of dreams, and he shares them with his family. And both of the dreams have others symbolically bowing down to him. In the first dream, it was his brothers. In the second dream, it's like the whole family. And in their response in verse 11 was that his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in his mind. What happens is, of course, they're furious at what he says. Even his dad's irritated, but at the same time, his dad has a perspective. Like Jacob has this perspective going, right? Because he knows. He's had that experience, but God has specifically revealed himself to him in a dream. And he knows of others who have received God's instruction that way too. And so he just tucks that away in the back of his mind and Well, we see what happens when we allow our anger to go unchecked, when we foster it, maybe when we nurture it, when we don't deal with it, it grows. And in this case, we see the situation certainly seem to get a whole lot worse. Because what happens is the brothers, the older brothers, the 10, they're away, it seems, there are 10 of them there, they're away tending flocks. And his dad, hasn't heard a thing about them in the last while. So he says, Joseph, I want you to go out there and see how they're doing. And then don't stay out there. Come back. Bring me word how they're doing. And so Joseph goes out, and he's wandering around looking for them, and they're not there. And so he's wandering around the fields. And then he comes across a guy who says, oh yeah, they've moved on, right? They probably needed more grazing for the animals, and so they've moved on. And they went to this area near Dothan. So he heads over there. And when we're told that while he's still a ways away, they see him coming with his nice little fancy robe on there. And right? All of that just triggers those feelings, right? It's like maybe they're thinking, oh, the narc, the spy has come to check us out and to report on us. And so their response was pretty drastic. In verse 37, verse 19, they say, here comes that dreamer, right? Still going back to what they really got under their skin. They said to each other, come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of those cisterns and say that a ferocious animal has devoured him. And then we'll see what comes of his dreams. Now, he did have one brother that tries to temper that because he wants to rescue him. And if you know your birth order, you could probably guess it's the oldest son. It's his oldest brother, Reuben, who wants to actually save him from death. But while he's gone, there's others that are staying around. So, I mean, he is stripped of his robe, thrown into the cistern, but some traders, Traders, come, and they're on their way to Egypt. And so Judah comes up with this idea, hey, this is better. Let's not kill him ourselves. Let's not have his blood on his hands, and let's make some money on the side, right? Let's seize this opportunity, and we'll sell him as a slave to the traders. And so that's exactly what they do. And of course, Reuben comes back later and goes, right? What's going on? And he finds out what's happened. And we're told that Joseph, of course, is sold off. And the brothers, they kill a goat and they spill a bunch of the blood on his robe. And then they bring it back to their dad and say, we found this, like all innocent, like, we found this. Well, you check it out. What do you think? And of course, he recognizes it as Joseph's, the robe that he gave him. And he goes into mourning. And the chapter ends, it switches back just to sort of, the scene switches back to tell us a little bit about what happened to Joseph, that they do get to Egypt, and there he is sold as a slave to a rather important person, like the captain of the prison guard, right, who would work for the Pharaoh. And so he is sold there. And so that's where we're sort of leaving. Then we get verse 38, which is a really interesting story in the sense that one is, what you see is the Bible doesn't whitewash things. It doesn't just give you, the pretty looking stuff. You get some nitty gritty, nasty stuff, details. And Judah, it tells a story of Judas, right? The one who said, hey, let's sell him. How things really go. He has this life, and some of the choices he make just really seem to put a threat in God's promise of blessing. And it's going downhill, and we see moral failings, and there's just, it leaves you with like, like this isn't good. And it provides a contrast for what's coming, and perhaps that's why it's there. And also, at so many points of the story, it's like, will God's promise come true? When things bad happen to us, often we're prone to ask, why? Why me? Where's this going to take me? And so we see that things aren't very good. And then for Judah and where he goes, and then we switch again, 39, and the story goes back to Joseph, and we find out that yes, he started out as a slave, and it may look like God's abandoned Joseph and he's off the picture, but the story follows him, and we're told that yes, he's in a foreign land, right? And he probably knows no one, and certainly probably feels betrayed and alone. But we read at this low point in chapter 39, verse 2, that the Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. And when his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes, and he became his attendant. He gets this major promotion. He's learning these skills, practical skills on how to do certain things and run things that he never had. But he's a fast learner, obviously, and he puts his heart into it. He's no slacker. And he rises right up, and he gets his promotion. He's in charge of everything. It's house of the household and entrusted with everything he owns. Why? And why God blesses Joseph. We can see God's hand of blessing on him, and things are going well. And then, everything goes downhill again. Right? Potiphar's wife takes a liking to him, to this young, well-built, and handsome man, and she tries to seduce him, and he wants nothing to do with her. He has no interest in betraying his master, and he has no interest in sinning against God. Right? His moral compass is due north, right? It's on course. But his no to her seems to only make him more desirable to her, more of a challenge perhaps. But she keeps after him day after day, and he tries to avoid her as much as he can, but right, he operates out of this house. And one day he's doing his job, doing his duties in the house, and there's no one around, no slaves, no one around, except who shows up but Potiphar's wife. And she corners him. She grabs a hold of him and tries to pull him. Let's go to bed, right? She grabs a hold of him. And he freaks, I think, right? He's like, he bolts, just like, ah! And he runs out of there, and he leaves his cloak behind. And now she's had it, right? She's angry. She's rejected. It's like, this is the last time, buddy. And she sees her opportunity for revenge, and she goes out of the house calling, right, rape, basically. And she says that Joseph tried to rape her, that he sexually assaulted her, right? And that she holds his cloak as proof. And she tells her husband the same thing, and of course her husband's angry, feeling betrayed as well. And he puts Joseph in prison. Oh, right? Climbs his way up, and then just as things are so good, boom, now even worse off. Even Judah wasn't in prison. And so he's done the right things, and yet he seems to get punished for it. He's innocent. He's charged with sexual assault. But he's innocent. He's the victim, actually, of these unwanted sexual advances and lies, and his reputation is smeared. Right? Where did doing the right thing? It seemed like it just landed in prison. And where's God in all of this? And does it pay to do the right thing? And why me? That might be some of the questions that we might ask in similar circumstances. But chapter 39 ends by summarizing Joseph's experience in prison. And verse 20 read, "The Lord was with him. He showed him kindness, and he granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done here. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care, because the Lord was with Joseph, and he gave him success in whatever he did." Wow, so he starts there, and again, it seems like God isn't done yet, that's for sure. And the promise is, well, we're not sure what's going to happen. He's in jail now, he's in prison, but we see God brings him from just an inmate, we might say, to he is running the show. And he does such a good job, and he's trusted by the warden, so that he doesn't even really worry about things. He doesn't sort of keep an eye on him. It's like he knows it's being looked after. You see the character of Joseph come through once again. And I find it interesting that what's happening in both of these circumstances is he's coming from this animal herder, right? And not even maybe that great at it. He was just young. To now he's developed the skills to run this household for Potiphar, and what all that meant. And it's not just, there were servants and all kinds of things going on. And now he's running a prison, and so well that he sort of got free rein. And in each case, we're told that God's hand of blessing is on him, right? That God is still at work even in the most difficult circumstances. that things maybe aren't always what they seem. That even in situations where, as Paul says, they meant it for evil, but God takes it and turns it into good. And maybe you're in such a place today, going through a hard time. Maybe you're experiencing your own disaster. Maybe someone has it out for you and they meant it for evil. But we know that God can turn it around for good, because that's the kind of God that we serve. And so if you're in that kind of place, our story today reminds us that things aren't always what they seem to be, and that God is faithful, and God will turn whatever mess it is into something good, and will be building you accordingly. Thanks for listening and joining me. Thank you.